I said that in one of my last meetings, and only one phone went off, it was mine.
You're on.
Okay, lady, turn my mic on.
Yep, it's on.
Not pretty much, right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to tonight's public hearings on the three land use ordinance amendments to the land use ordinance that will be voted on at the town meeting. Everybody okay?
Yep.
Tonight is a formal public hearing, which is different than when we have information meetings like we did with conservation or we did with the housing ordinance, whatever. So it's a little more formal. It's not a conversation. When we get to the land, the public hearing piece of it, I will kind of go down some rules. And so where we are, so there's three amendments to the ordinance that are out there. We being the planning board, started working on them, I guess, the housing density almost 2 years ago. And then last spring, we kept going on housing density, and the Conservation Commission picked up and helped us out with the solar part of their amendment to the ordinance. And we've also got, the third one is fees, giving the select board the authority to set land use building permit fees. So the process basically starts with the planning board kind of deciding which of the pieces of the ordinance that we think need either some scrubbing, some rewriting, or in this case, there's two new ones. Two of the amendments are new, three of them if you count fees. We then met, George and I met with the head of the Conservation Commission, the Appeals Board, and the Historic District chairs. And what came out of that meeting to say, okay, what do we want to do and who's willing to step to the plate, help with that. Conservation Commission stepped to the plate and helped us big time with, and actually took the lead on solar, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then the planning board continued on with the housing density piece, housing diversity density. So I will start with the way this will work is I will do an introduction to each individual amendment. Then Mr. Thabarge, our planner, will give a presentation on including the details, I guess more of the technical aspects of it. And then we'll move into the public hearing piece, and then we'll open the public hearing, take questions and comments, and then close it. The one thing I do need to say, and I'll probably say this more than once, is the amendments that you've got, and everybody hopefully has copies on the back board there. Those amendments are draft, but the language is set. So we worked through this process that I talked about, where the planning board met. We worked with Mr. Thabarge. We had an information meeting back in November on housing density, and then we discussed what we heard from the public at that meeting, voted to send it on to the select board, who voted on it, sent it back to us. And so what you've got are the language that will appear before the town meeting. And there is not an opportunity, this is still draft, but it doesn't get changed. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to inform everybody what it's saying. For the public who can't pick up hard copies, they are on the town website under draft land use ordinance information. And so provide you some information, answer any questions, listen to any comments, and close the meeting. And then the next opportunity will be at the town meeting. So housing density, this is based on LD 2003, which the legislature passed back in summer of 2022. The intent was it was called affordable housing. That part of the law does not really pertain to Durham. So our piece is more about housing density and diversity, the types of housing. So we went through the We worked on the amendments, and George will give you some of the details, but we developed the amendment based upon a couple of key pieces to it. One is what we've heard as a planning board since probably a comp plan passed, but the town is very concerned about density and how many homes are being built and maintaining the rural character. At the same time, there is a goal in the comp plan that talks about housing diversity and improving housing opportunities in Durham. So probably the lead issue that we looked at was maintaining the rural character, but we think that we've also provided some opportunities for more diversity and some more help to the housing shortage here in Maine. So with that, I will, Mr. Thabars, turn it over to you to give the presentation.
Okay, thank you, John. Pretty much the presentation I'm going to do is going to be very short. We've had, as John mentioned, several public meetings. All the information that I'll be presenting tonight is right on the town website, and we do have handouts in the back, which is going to include just a few slides that we have on this issue. So, as John said, this is the planning board recommendation, which has been endorsed by the select board and will be going to town meeting as one of the 3 land use ordinance amendment warrant articles. So as John indicated, the part of this stems from the comprehensive plan, which looked at the current zoning requirements for single family. And this slide illustrates that for a single family home in Durham to be built, it has to have at least a 2-acre lot. Actually, it's 2.07 rounded off. And it has to have at least 300 feet of road frontage. You are allowed currently to have 1 accessory apartment, and that can be no more than 50% of the floor area of the house. And then finally, when you put those 2 together, you are allowed to have a maximum of 2 housing units on any 2-acre lot at this point. There is an alternative to that, and that is to have a duplex, where you have 2 full-size housing units side by side, or one over the other. But under Durham's regulations that have been in effect since at least 2000 and probably before that, to do a duplex you had to have another ½ acre, which if you have a 300-foot wide lot, that adds 67 feet on the back, and you're good to go with a duplex. So the comprehensive plan had actually recommended, unless there's some real logical basis for requiring that extra 67 feet, to go down to 2 acres. So that was one of the recommendations of the comprehensive plan, getting at this issue which John mentioned of getting more housing diversity. With a duplex, you are not allowed to have an accessory apartment currently under the ordinance, and so you still have the maximum of 2 housing units on a 2.5 acre lot. But they can be full-size units as opposed to the single family, which can only have an accessory apartment, which must be smaller. So then came LD 2003, as John mentioned, and under the new law, which is currently in effect statewide, it goes into effect for Durham and other towns that have a town meeting form of government. It doesn't take effect until July 1st of this year. But that law will require any vacant lot, and it's kind of complicated the way the legislature did this, and it's not clear exactly why, but they made the rule that if there's a vacant lot, you must allow 2 dwelling units, and those will be full-sized. They can either be a duplex or 2 standalone single-family homes, and you have a maximum requirement of 2 units. Every town has to allow at least 2 units. And you can, under the law, require an increased land area for those dwelling units up to the current minimum lot size, which in our case is 2 acres. So for those 2 units, 2 standalone single families on the same lot, you would be able to require 4 acres. Then the law looks at if there is a developed lot, which has an existing single family home on it, which is the darker illustration here, you must allow 3 dwelling units on that same lot, and this depiction shows expanding that single family to a duplex and then adding a standalone single family on that same lot. It can, under the law, the language says it can be one attached, one detached, or one of each. That's what's illustrated here, one attached and one detached, one of each. Maximum of 3 units must be allowed by every town that allows single family on a lot like this. And you can require, in our case, the minimum lot size for each of these units, which would result, if this law goes into effect as of July 1st, and the town elects to apply that, 2 acres per dwelling, then they would be required to have 6 acres for those 3 housing units. So, this is what the law requires. We looked at the comprehensive plan recommendations, and then that led to the planning board's recommendation after receiving public input that to address the housing needs and to respect the rural character of Durham, this proposal is to allow a single family to have 2 accessory apartments. And this shows an addition to this house, half the size of that, and then an accessory apartment over the detached garage. Those are both shown in the lighter color there. So this would allow a second smaller accessory apartment on a 2-acre lot, and you would have a maximum of 3 housing units allowed as opposed to 2. And the second thrust of this planning board proposal is to follow LD 2003. If we are required to have full-size housing units on those lots, then require 2 acres for each of the full-sized dwelling units, and then so that would relate to 6 acres for the 3 dwelling units as allowed by the law, and again you would have a maximum of 3 housing units. And I think part of the philosophy of this proposal is to say, look, this is really in keeping with the town's rural character and the character of the single-family homes that are in the community. This is what the state requires, which is not necessarily as conducive to rural character. And so this is what the state requires. Hopefully this policy will lean toward this implementation as opposed to this because of that required land area. There can be and there probably will be some of this. But that's kind of the thrust of the planning board proposal. So in terms of the specific amendments that are on those handouts in the back, Article 4 will be changed in the following ways. It'll remove the single family or duplex 1 per lot, and that is required by the state law. It will require the 90,000 square feet, which is 2.07 acres per dwelling unit. It will exempt accessory apartments from that increased lot area, which is required by the law, and then it'll set the maximum of 3 dwelling units per lot. So those are the changes that need to be made to Article 4 to implement this policy. Then in Article 5, which is the performance standards, some additional changes have to happen. This really doesn't have to happen, but I think it kind of is in keeping with what is being proposed. Change from single-family character, which is kind of the state is against that concept of you can have areas with only single family, and really reflecting what the comprehensive plan is looking for, which is rural character. So that wording change, and then as required, we would remove, or as recommended, we would remove the restriction for 1 accessory apartment, allowing 2, and then finally under Article 5, a change that would remove the single-family restriction for backlots, which is required by LD 2003. Then under Article 16, non-conforming lots. One of the things that came up in the public input was, what about a 1-acre lot that's grandfathered? Would you be able to put in the 3 units on that? And the answer is no. This proposed amendment changes the grandfathering basis from lot area, which arguably you could say they're exempt or grandfathered from those increases, to minimum lot size, which was really the original intent. That if you had a 1-acre lot that was created under the old growth management, and now it's grandfathered, they would be able to do what they could on any 2-acre lot. And then adding full-size dwelling units will increase the lot area for each proposed dwelling unit. Now on that grandfathered lot, they could do the 2 accessory apartments. So they would be grandfathered for that. So that's pretty much, oh, and there was one more, which is the definitions, just clarifying the purpose of accessory apartments and then also eliminating multifamily. With the old growth district, they used to allow 3 and 4 dwelling unit buildings, but that's not in the ordinance, so the planning boards thought that should just be removed for now. And it can be looked at in the future. So that's pretty much the details of the proposal. Now I'll turn it back to you, John.
Thank you. Just, I think if I may jump on a couple of things. One is the size of the accessory apartment can be no more than 50% of the existing house. So, and if you had 2 of them, you know, each one could not exceed 50% of the existing house. The other question that came up a couple of times is if you live in a subdivision, does this apply? And as George says, if it's a 1 acre, no, or if the covenants for the subdivision do not allow accessory apartments or additional housing. So it kind of, the subdivision, the HOA can kind of set that rule. So that's part of the state law. So with that, is there any comments from the planning board before we open the public hearing? Okay, and we will now open the public hearing at 6:45. What I'd like to do, what I was gonna do is hold it down to about 3 minutes to make sure everybody could get heard, but since there's only a few folks here, what I would like to do is hold your comments, questions to 5 minutes, and then pause. And if you would, all your questions, comments should be directed to me. I will then farm it out to George or myself or a planning board member to help us answer that. So with that, the public hearing is open at 6:45, and anyone, you don't have to come up, but if you have to speak loudly so the mic can pick you up. So if you'd like, please, your name, address, and we can begin. First person.
Yeah, Russ Cole, 71 New Gloucester. I have a question and a clarification. So the accessory apartment's still 50% each or total? 50% of the house size?
Each is 50%.
Each.
Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but each, so,
So total it to be 100%?
Yeah.
And the other question I have is, what happens with septic requirements for the additional housing?
good question. So, the state law limits what we can do in terms of setbacks, buffers, and all that other stuff, but the additional housing must fit on the lot. So if you add 2 additional things, it has to be able to physically fit. You can't encroach into buffers or setbacks or anything like that. If you will have to prove that your septic system can support 1 or 2 additional housing units. So the size, and you will get a permit from the codes officer.
And when we did ours, our septic was based on the number of rooms,
Right,
which either
bedrooms.
are or could be used as a bedroom.
Right,
You know, so for instance, we had a very small room that we used as a storage room, and it has like a little 2x2 closet. So that had to be accounted for as a bedroom
right,
in the size of the drain field, and the tank was already oversized.
right,
So the number of additional bedrooms
correct,
have to be accounted for in the drain field of that tank.
correct.
And if you have specific questions to the audience, maybe more than anyone else, if you want to do this and you have a specific question about, will this work on my property, on my lot, please I'd ask you to check with the codes or the planner, and they can tell you whether your septic's gonna work or you've got the right spacing or whatever it may need to be.
Comment? Nobody's septic is oversized.
What's that?
Nobody's septic is oversized. You're only gonna have to add septic.
Anyone else? Sir?
Yeah, because Steve Brzezinski, Quaker Ridge Road. Question on the increase in lot size for a 2-family duplex. Is the half acre, is that to compensate for the additional septic and well water use, given the larger area? What's the rationale for the extra half acre to have a 2-family duplex? I'm just curious on the rationale for that.
I think it's really just kind of get to where we've got a standard, and we're trying to make, if you try to maintain the rural character, and anybody else is happy to jump in, but I'm not saying we're trying to force people out or make you pay more for land, but I think really the intent is to keep somewhat the rural character by going to the bigger lot.
Okay, thank you.
John, can I ask that, answer, address that
Please
one
do.
too? Okay, so I think the question was about the extra half acre, which is on the current zone. And it's not clear what that is there for. If I had to guess, I'd say it might be about the septic more than anything, but we don't really know. The proposal to require 2 acres per full-size dwelling is really related to maintaining rural character. So that is what limited understanding we have of the half acre.
So maybe it would help to explain what if this passes, and with the big if this passes, and I wanted to do a duplex,
It
how
would
much?
require 4 acres
4 acres.
instead of 2.
So
and-
2
current
per-
2.5.
Per half, or each living unit. And that's in keeping with single family and all that stuff, so. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? Comments? George, were there any other frequently asked questions that we may need to cover at this point?
Well, we had received several questions. You addressed the one about subdivision, or excuse me, about, if you have a subdivision. So we've had for several months now, some questions and answers. You know, people asked about how do driveways get treated, you know, those sorts of things. So on the website, there are some specific questions that have been addressed, coming from the public hearing. So that information's all available online if people have questions.
Good reminder.
And as you said, is going forward to the town meeting, if people have additional questions, feel free to send them to the town planner on the town website, and I'll try to answer them.
And if you do that, then we can be better prepared on the 6th of April to answer them and not have anything hanging out there. Anybody on the planning board have any questions, comments? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. And we will move on to the next topic. Okay, solar. And at this point, I'm gonna ask my friends from the Conservation Commission, as I'm explaining how the process worked with them. So when we met with the chairs of the various committees, Conservation Commission felt like solar farms was something that we should be addressing. And they gladly, or willingly, or happily stepped to the plate and have done a great job, actually, in developing a solar ordinance. And the reason we're dealing with solar is we don't have any rules on solar, so it'd have to go to a non-conforming use. What we're trying to do is set standards, so someone who wants to develop a solar project in Durham knows what their standards are, and either can meet them or don't come to the town. So with that, I will turn it over. Is there anything else we want to discuss from the Conservation Commission? So if you would introduce yourselves, I'm sorry.
Mike Friendly, Run Around Pond Road.
Roberta Brzezinski, Quaker Ridge Road.
Okay, that I'll turn it over, George, to you to,
Yep, okay, again, I'm gonna try to explain the details of this proposal coming from the Conservation Commission. So one of the fundamental pieces of this, if you think about what's going on around the state, regionally, and some of the surrounding towns here, what you're seeing is everything from rooftop on a small house to these large fields with 20, 30, 100 acres of solar panels. So many towns, and the Conservation Commission looked at Topsom, we looked at the state models, we looked at other states, and pretty much the systematic approach to regulating these solar energy systems is to classify them into 3 groups. The small is pretty much home or small business applications, which have limited impact. And then medium scale, which would be like, if you go to, I'm gonna show you one in Cumberland on Route 1, that, an office building, probably about 10,000, 20,000 square foot office building, basically built about a half acre of solar panels that's gonna supply all their energy. And we'll see what the visual impacts of that are. And then the large industrial are those ones that are used for generating utility for broad distribution. So, just to give you some illustrations, and this doesn't show up really good with those lights on it, but, and maybe Roberta, you could just flick those lights off, let's just get a better illustration.
Just these two right
Try
here.
one of them. That's it. Okay, this shows up better. Okay, so you see for a single family, it can either be roof, this is probably what you see mostly around, rooftop application, and then ground mounted. This is becoming more popular because these can rotate and not get into the roof problems. So the draft regulations treat either any single family application up to 8,000 square feet of these panels, either on the ground or on the rooftop. Those can be approved by the code officer with just standard electrical permits, and building if it affects the roof structure. And then because of the public input, where people were talking about, well, really rooftop systems don't really have much visual impact or other concerns. And so this was expanded to actually include, so for example, the school system on the elementary school you could do, and many communities have done this, or as well as this building that we're in right now. You could put solar panels on top of this building, as much as you could get on there, and that could be permitted by the code officer with no planning board input or review. So that's what's being defined in these regulations as a small system. And then the second classification will be medium, which would be an example of a system that would serve a subdivision. And these can be between 8,000 square feet up to just under a half an acre. And typically these are going to be ground mounted systems. To do this as part of a subdivision or added to a subdivision, you would have to go to the planning board just for site plan review. And we'll be looking at the standards that will be applied, including a 100-foot setback from the property line to the actual panels, and then fencing for safety purposes. And then, depending on a visual impact analysis as part of the review, the planning board has the authority to require buffering, either from a public road view, as is illustrated in this. So that's from standing right there, looking that way. And if that's going to be visible, it only needs to be 100 feet back from the property line. Or if there was a neighbor right here, the planning board could require buffering on that side as well. But the intent is to say, this is their project, they're doing it. If they want to buffer it, that's fine, but they would not be required to buffer it from their own project. And then the third classification is the large commercial and industrial, which are greater than half an acre. And recognize that if you have a half an acre of these panels, with the spacing, that translates at least a doubling of the land area for it. So this would require a conditional use review before site plan review, and at that stage, the board would look at what are the surrounding uses. If these are all dense neighborhoods around it, then that's going to impact whether it really fits in with that character. If it's next to the power line, then, and there's no houses around, then that probably would pass the conditional use criterion for scale being compatible with surrounding uses. And then, once the use issue is addressed, then they would go to the same detailed site plan review process as the medium scale. But there would be a two-step process for these larger industrial scale installations. And that would be an example of the visual impact analysis, and the planning board could and most likely would require a buffering of that entire road frontage. So here's an example, actual. The industrial scale. This is along Route 2 not Pittsfield, it's Canaan. There's a DOT installation there, and I'm not sure if this was put in by the state or by private developers. Actually, I think it was maybe Chinbro, and there's probably, I don't know, I haven't seen aerials, but there's probably 100 acres of panels there right next to Route 2. And then the smaller community scale, you can actually drive down Route 1 in Cumberland. This was put in last fall. That's that one I was telling you about that's serving a commercial building. It's going to supply all their energy. So you can see the potential visual impacts of that facility being located on some of the open field roads here in Durham. So the draft amendments to implement the Conservation Commission proposal will have these changes in the land use ordinance. Article 3, it will add site plan review to the types of permits needed in the table. It'll add medium and large scale solar systems to the table of land uses. It'll add the review requirements for those medium and large scale solar energy systems. So those are the changes that are needed for Article 3. Article 5 is the performance standards, and this will add a whole new section which will have the 3 classes that we discussed. It'll list the submission requirements for these larger 2 classes, and then it'll list the performance standards for them as well, which I'll get into in just a minute. And then Article 8 will add these types of systems to the requirements for site plan review. Currently, it's building a building, non-residential building, or adding a certain amount of parking. This will clarify that whether they're adding a parking lot or building a building, also have to get that site plan review. And then finally, in Article 19, it'll add some very typical definitions to the ordinance, which all relate to these special uses. So, submission requirements, they will have to have an operation and maintenance plan, and this is pretty much right out of most of the ordinances that you will find. They have to have all the specifications for what they're going to be proposing submitted to the planning board. They have to have certifications that they meet all safety codes, and that they meet PUC requirements, Public Utilities Commission, for connecting into the grid. They have to have an emergency services plan that's approved by the fire chief. They have to have a visual impact analysis by a landscape architect. They have to have a vegetation management plan, which will cover both the panel areas as well as the vegetative buffer, if any. And then they'll have to have a decommissioning plan. These things have an expected life of 25 to 30 years. They may or may not be able to be recycled in terms of are they still producing enough to make it cost effective. So like cell towers and other types of these uses, most communities require a decommissioning plan that says when they're done, they have to take it off the site and restore the site to the original condition. And they have to have a financial guarantee to do that. So that if they leave, the town has the wherewithal to get that addressed. And they have to keep that, they have to keep that in effect, and I'll explain in a minute how that gets done. Then finally, they have to have a public outreach plan, talking to the neighbors and working with them. And then the performance standards is another whole set of the draft regulations. I mentioned the 100-foot property line setback. They can't go in and mine all the topsoil off the site before they do this. They have to do an invasive species survey before the development occurs, and then after, to show that they haven't brought in a lot of invasive plants. They have to mitigate in terms of the surface glare, and if you drive along some of the roads and see ones that are not treated in this way, you'll see why that's there. They have to have an 8-foot agricultural style. This does not allow the typical chain link security fencing. It's more in keeping with Durham's rural character. And they have to have ground clearance for small mammals to be able to go under the fencing. Maximum height is 15 feet, and the ones that are down in Cumberland, if you want to see, those are just at 15 feet. So they extend up above the fencing and the buffering as well, potentially. That 50-foot vegetative buffer, as I said, was outside the security fence where needed per the visual impact analysis. The planning board will have discretion on that under the ordinance. And all utilities will be placed underground except where they're required by the utility companies to be above ground. Any lighting, and we don't really expect there to be much, if any, would have to be minimized and shielded. For sound purposes, some of the equipment in these does generate a humming noise, and any equipment that hums or produces noise would have to be 400 feet from any residence. They would have to have emergency access information posted, so that if there is something happening there, the fire department knows who to contact about it. They have to have warning signs that some of these are very high voltage. It has to be well-maintained and free of hazards. It has any minor modifications, like changing some of the equipment, small changes in location or something like that. Once it's approved by the planning board, the code officer has some flexibility, but any substantial, like an expansion of it, would have to come back to the planning board. And the part of that decommissioning accountability says that if they change ownership, they've got to notify the code officer, and the new owners have to acknowledge that they understand all of the requirements that are that are in the ordinance and the planning board approval. And any breach of the approval, it would be a breach of the approval for their decommissioning financial guarantee to expire and not be maintained. And it provides for the shutdown of the facility if they let that financial guarantee lapse. So that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of it.
My turn again? Okay, so as you can kind of see the stuff that George showed up there on the screen, those are the kinds of things that we realized that we didn't have as a town. And so we've got them laid out there for the planning board's use, the code enforcement's use, also for anybody who comes in as an applicant. And I can't say enough about the work that the Conservation Commission did digging this stuff up. They went and looked at a bunch of places, they looked at a whole bunch of other ordinances, as did George, and took what we think is the best of what we saw out there. They had a public information meeting back in December to lay this out, and I know it was well received by a lot of folks, and appreciate all the hard work they've done. With that, I'll quit talking and open the public hearing at 7:07. Anyone wish to speak? Sir?
Steve Brzezinski. This looks pretty well put together, but I'm wondering, is this a good time that you could maybe also address wind power at the same time? In case someone decides they want to come in and put in some wind towers? You never know, seriously.
We did
Sorry to
not.
bring it up.
We did not address it. It is something that we would, if we felt the need, we would probably take a look at. We're taking, what we can bite off in any given year. The follow-on to this is battery storage, which has a whole lot of other issues. I suppose the good news about wind power is that there's only a few places where it actually works. But that actually has enough wind to make it cost effective. And so far, we've not, I don't believe the town has anybody addressing windmills or wind power, whatever it may be. So it's certainly something that as we go through the coming years, if we feel like, hey, we want to do that, because one of the reasons for solar was people were interested in building solar facilities on town, and we wanted to get ahead of that. So, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Can anybody up here do it better than I did? Conservation Commission? Want to take a shot at it? So, any other questions? Phyllis,
Phyllis
please.
Brannon. So is there any impact to, if it's near the electrical grid, either to the grid or to solar? Is there any impact at all? When you see the grid, or, the electrical lines have this big, huge openings. If they were to be put near the electrical lines, does that have any impact? I don't know about electricity.
Do you mean, does the solar farm do damage to or are they not as efficient? Is that your question?
Right.
I will, anybody on,
I can kind of answer. There's actually, developers look for spaces near lines to actually be more efficient and cost-effective, because the closer you are to the source or where the power is coming in or out, the cheaper it's gonna be to build there. So, they actually look towards those, like substations or lines or whatever, so they're usually near those locations, sometimes,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you.
any, please, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Russ Coles. If I'm remembering correctly, which could be really wrong, the original draft said 2,000 square feet, max size for small.
That's correct.
And do you have any comment on how we moved up to 8? I'm not opposed to that, I'm just curious where that happened.
We wanted to be generous. I think we thought there might be some small businesses or homeowners that have greater needs, and we didn't want to, we wanted to encourage solar use. So we wanted to be generous with our minimum standards.
That
I
was
think it's-
feedback that we got from the town meeting, that we probably needed to have a bit bigger range.
Yeah, there were 2 people there who were real knowledgeable.
Yeah, when we looked at other towns, the 2,000 was at the very low end. I guess that's another point, but most of the towns were more generous than us, so we recognized that 2,000 was probably too low.
And we got 8,000 from another example, one of the towns, I think. Was it Refield, maybe? Or it might have even been the Audubon's.
Audubon said 15,000. Oakland said 5,000, Topsom said 1 acre. I mean, the numbers are kind of all over the place. So we picked sort of a middle of the road.
Phyllis, when you had asked about the thing with the power lines, when you drive around, do you look at the power lines? Sometimes there's 2 wires, sometimes there's 3, 2 on top and 1 on the bottom, and sometimes there's 3. The more wires there are, the bigger the project that the power lines can accept. And as you drive around Durham and look around, it's almost all 1 line. So that's pretty limiting. That I believe that when I looked at CMP's website, a 2,000 square foot system would exceed the capacity of a single line system already. But if you look at that Cumberland project on Route 1, you look up the line, it's a single line, but you can see they used plastic hangers that look kind of like Christmas ornaments and added the other lines as a way to increase the output capacity of the system that they put in. So that made me think that maybe my idea that the infrastructure was going to limit the size of solar projects may not be as true as I thought it was. However, that system is pretty close to the transmission lines, so they didn't have that far to go on existing poles hanging off of the existing wires to put in a system that size. The other thing is that this would be up to the planning commission, because that doesn't have any barrier to vision to sight along Route 1, which I'm not sure how the planning board would deal with that. We can all, it's right there. It's too close really for much of a vegetative barrier. And if you want to see another one that's kind of interesting, I may have been going to breakfast at Holy Donut. And
May happen.
in Scarborough, and there's a system there that's pretty large, and it's got a wooden fence that's quasi-decorative between Holy Donut and it. That's it. There's no other fencing. You can go walk around in it. You could vandalize it. You could go get electrocuted. And that kind of made me go, well, that's dumb.
But I think in George, his presentation, there are things we have done. It is up to the planning board. The planning board has the
Right.
discretion of requiring buffers. And so something that was right on Route 9, 196, or even some of the other town roads
Right.
would, I can't speak for future planning boards, but I think would be seriously considered that you would put a landscape buffer in it. And they work if it's done well, as you're driving into Auburn on the left-hand side by Penley Quarter Church, just past that, there is a fairly significant solar farm behind the tree line that is very difficult to see, even in the wintertime when the leaves are gone. So one of the reasons, and the conservation guys and George did a great job, and Juliet was our solar expert, put it together. I think we tried to incorporate as many of those protections, if you will, as possible. Distance from the road and all those other kinds of things.
I agree, and I think they're in there, and I like it.
Thank you. Any other questions before I close the public hearing? Anything else? The Conservation Commission? And Ms. Jess Costa, who is their chairperson, has joined us, and she helped answer that along with Michael. Any other questions, comments that you want to get across solar before the town meeting, other than to vote for it, or? Seeing none, planning board, anything you'd like to add to the discussion?
Question on the images that, so George, is this the presentation that you had at the town meeting?
I don't think so, and I know Joe is gonna be, he's been talking to the town manager about getting some sort of a presentation, but definitely not anything in this kind of depth. It'll probably just be a summary and maybe a couple of illustrations, but we'll be working with the select board on what they want to present. But there won't be time to go through this type of a presentation.
Okay, my only question was about the photos that you had of examples of sizes of solar panel arrays. Sorry, it's the wrong term.
Solar
but,
project.
If whether or not those towns have buffering requirements, and you know, they're
Most of them don't.
okay. It'd be good to see an example of, if you're gonna show a photo of one, to show one that has a buffering requirement and what that looks like, rather than being so visible from the road.
What we can do, though, I think if it helps, and for the folks listening at home, is we can put this information on, that a lot of it already
We'll have
is.
these handouts right there.
It'll be there and also on the website going in. We can put it up on the website now so that people can take a look at it.
It's already there.
It's already there. So those of you at home, the town website has this information digitally. So any other questions, comments from the board or otherwise? If not, I will close the public hearing at 7:17.
I got just one
Oh,
comment,
I
John.
will reopen it ever so briefly.
I just for the record wanted to say that the idea of not passing this wouldn't mean we couldn't have solar farms. It's just saying this is actually giving the planning board power to oversee some of the projects, and without them, solar farms could still happen. It's just we wouldn't have the knobs to turn in order to give buffering and things like that. So I think that's been clear to everyone, but I just wanted to state it for whoever else is listening out there.
Thank you, Tyler. Anything else? So now I will officially close it at 7:18, the public hearing. It will move on to the third and final ordinance amendment, which is fees. And a little bit of background on that. At, I guess it was the 2022 town meeting, the town passed a ordinance or whatever, a rule that allowed the select board to set fees. And then what's before us, before the town meeting, is formalizes that process into an article on the, in the land use ordinance, and working with attorneys and others, their recommendation was to list those fees that we know we're gonna need. So you'll see a long list of, up through P or Q, of all the fees that we know we're going to need, including solar energy systems. And if we get to wind, we would have one for wind power as well. And then there is also a caveat in the second page that allows the select board to change those fees or add fees as they're needed. So if there's a fee that we're missing that is included, the process is included in the land use ordinance, they could elect to do that. And it would also allow the select board to change or add fees periodically. So, and I know that codes and select board, and George, I suspect you had a lot to do with that, spent a lot of time going around to a bunch of different towns and finding out what others are charging. From my own personal experience, when I moved to town 3 years ago, and I found out, you know, the fees to completely redo the second floor of my house, electrical, plumbing, and otherwise, I got a hell of a deal. And I don't, you know, I think the code guy put a lot more time and effort into that than I paid him for based on the fees that existed at the time. So I don't think they're outrageous, but we want to set it, so. George, anything you want to say?
John, you've pretty much hit almost every button up there in terms of the details. So as you said, it's pretty much, in 2022, the voters said, let's not have to amend the ordinance every time we want to change a fee. Let's delegate that to the select board, but devil's in the details, as they say. So when it went to the select board, they were questioning, well, wait a minute, if a fee isn't mentioned in the ordinance, can we still adopt a fee for it? Got the town attorney weighed in, and he thought, well, you might be able to get by with it, but if you want to make sure it's legally enforceable, it ought to be in your ordinance, where the other fees are all in the ordinance. So this was kind of a patching job here, where we said, what are the ones that are missing? Those are the ones that are on the slide in the list, as well as some new ones, and then said, look, let's not keep going through this. Every time we figure out we want to start charging for a service that the town is providing based on land use ordinance, that led to the select board saying, let's have an umbrella provision that says if it's in the ordinance and we're providing the service, we should be able to adopt a fee. And then, as John mentioned, finally, the periodically changed from annually. It gives more flexibility for the select board to do this.
It should also help the residents, contractors, whomever, to say, do I have, like, when I tore down an old building on my farm, do I have to get a demolition permit? The answer is yes, and so it should help them rather than start work and say, oh, I didn't know I needed a demolition permit or whatever. Not that somebody's not gonna demolish something without a permit, but hopefully they won't. So, having said that, I will open the public hearing to anyone who has questions about fees. Land use fees. Opened it at 7:22. I have to wait another 10 seconds so I can close it at 7:23. Any questions, comments, planning board, any comments?
Quick
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry, Roberta.
Roberta Brzezinski, Quaker Ridge Road. Was there any material for that? I didn't see it. And is that online?
It is online, and I think, George, we have,
Should be up in the back.
there should be a handout.
Okay, a lot of them looked
Everything
similar.
looks the same.
Everything looked the same,
Yeah.
and so I was getting confused.
There's three groups of piles, but everything is in fact online.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? We've now reached 7:23. I will close the public hearing. Any other comments, questions from the planning board about any of this? If not, I'll remind everybody that the vote for town officials is on the 5th of April at, I forget where, Eureka, I think.
Eureka.
In Eureka, and then the town meeting is the 6th at the school. So that's when these, along with a bunch of budget articles and other things, will be voted on. If you like it, please tell your friends, encourage them to come out and vote. Democracy at work. And if something for the audience at home or whatever, if something comes up, contact the codes or George, and we'll get you the answer before the meeting. With that, I will say goodbye. George, would you please turn it off? And planning board, if you would turn off your mics. You have to hold it down, I think. Thanks for coming out, folks.